Have you ever wondered what happens when someone pushes too far, crosses that invisible line between entertainment and disrespect? Today's story will show you exactly that. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this one might just change your life. The morning sun painted Windsor Castle in shades of gold, its ancient stones standing proud against the spring sky. Tourists from every corner of the globe gathered at the Long Walk entrance, their excited chatter filling the air with a buzz of anticipation. Children pointed at the towering walls, elderly couples consulted their guidebooks, and dozens of phones captured the majesty of centuries of British tradition. But among the respectful visitors, 23-year-old Alex Thompson saw something different. Through his designer sunglasses, he didn't see history. He saw an opportunity that would soon teach him the most important lesson of his life. Alex wasn't your typical tourist. With over 500,000 followers across his social media platforms, he'd built his brand on pushing boundaries, creating viral moments that left people either laughing or shaking their heads. His best friend and cameraman Marcus Chen stood ready with their expensive camera equipment, both of them scanning the scene like hunters looking for prey. "This is perfect," Alex whispered, adjusting his perfectly styled hair. All these people, with their phones out, instant audience, mate, we're going viral today. Marcus nodded, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. He'd been filming Alex's pranks for 3 years now, but something about this felt different. Emma Thompson, Alex's older sister, watched from a few feet away, her arms crossed and her expression tight with worry. She hadn't wanted to come, but someone needed to be the voice of reason. "Alex," she called softly, "remember what Mum said about respecting traditions." But Alex wasn't listening. His attention was fixed on Royal Guard Ryan Parker, who stood perfectly still near the entrance. The guard's ceremonial rifle gleamed in the morning light, his bearskin hat casting a shadow across his stoic face. To most visitors, Guard Parker represented centuries of dignity and discipline. To Alex, he was just another prop in his next viral video. "Look at him," Alex smirked, speaking just loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. "Standing there like a statue. Bet he's dying for something interesting to happen." A few people turned to look, some already raising their phones, sensing entertainment in the making. Tour guide Catherine Mills was in the middle of explaining the castle's history to her group when she noticed Alex's behavior. She'd seen that look before, the mischievous glint of someone about to make a very poor decision. "The guards you see before you," she said pointedly, raising her voice slightly, "are not tourist attractions. They are active duty soldiers who, But her warning came too late. Alex was already moving, weaving through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone used to creating spectacles. Marcus followed, camera ready, while Emma's protests were lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. "Watch this!" Alex called out to his imaginary audience, playing to the cameras he knew were now pointed his way. "Let's see if these guards are really as disciplined as everyone says." He approached Guard Parker with exaggerated swagger, getting closer than any respectful tourist would dare. The guard remained motionless, but there was something in his stance, a subtle shift in energy that only the most observant visitors noticed. Officer James Bennett, the supervising guard, watched from his position nearby, his years of experience telling him exactly what was about to unfold. Alex raised his hand, fingers reaching for the guard's bearskin hat. "Come on, mate," he taunted. "Let's see what's under there." The crowd held its collective breath. Emma covered her face, unable to watch. Marcus zoomed in, expecting their usual viral gold. But what happened next would change everything. In a movement so swift it seemed impossible, Guard Parker's hand shot up, catching Alex's wrist in an iron grip. The tourist's cocky smile froze on his face as he found himself staring into eyes that had seen far more than social media pranks. "Step back, sir." The guard's voice cut through the sudden silence like a blade. It wasn't particularly loud, but it carried the weight of centuries of tradition and discipline. Alex's knees went weak as he realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Officer Bennett approached with measured steps, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent courtyard, "we need to have a conversation about respect." The phones were still recording, but now they captured something very different from what Alex had planned. They captured the moment a social media prankster learned that some traditions aren't meant to be mocked, some lines aren't meant to be crossed, and some lessons can only be learned the hard way. As Officer Bennett led Alex away from the crowd, Emma and Marcus exchanged glances. They knew this wasn't going to be just another viral video. This was going to be something much more significant, a moment that would change not just Alex's life, but the lives of everyone watching. What happened next would teach Alex and thousands of others an unforgettable lesson about respect, honor, and the true meaning of courage. But that's just the beginning of this incredible story. If you want to know what happened next and see how this moment transformed not just Alex's life, but the lives of countless others, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on respecting traditions. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. The silence in Officer Bennett's office was deafening. Alex Thompson sat in an uncomfortable wooden chair, his designer clothes suddenly feeling out of place against the room's austere military decor. The walls were lined with photographs and medals, each one telling a story of service and sacrifice that Alex had never bothered to understand until now. Officer James Bennett stood by the window, his reflection clear in the spotless glass. The morning sun highlighted the medals on his chest, each one earned through years of dedicated service. He hadn't said a word since bringing Alex into the office, letting the weight of silence do its work. Outside, tourists continued their tours, unaware of the drama unfolding within these walls. Emma and Marcus waited anxiously in the hallway, accompanied by another guard. Emma paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the polished floor, while Marcus sat with his camera in his lap, for once not eager to film anything. The camera that had captured countless pranks now felt heavy in his hands, like a reminder of all the times they'd crossed lines for the sake of entertainment. Finally, Officer Bennett turned to face Alex. His expression wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. It was disappointed, the kind of look that made Alex feel like a child who had let down not just one person, but an entire institution. "Do you know what these are?" Bennett asked, gesturing to the photographs on the wall. Alex shook his head, unable to meet the officer's gaze. "Each one of these represents a member of our guard who gave their life in service to their country. The hat you tried to knock off, it's not a prop, it's a symbol of their sacrifice." Alex shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The weight of his actions was starting to sink in, but Bennett wasn't finished. He walked to his desk and picked up a framed photograph, studying it for a moment before handing it to Alex. The photo showed a younger version of Guard Ryan Parker, the man whose hat Alex had tried to grab. In the image, Parker stood with his unit in Afghanistan, their faces dusty but determined. "3 of the men in that photo didn't come home," Bennett said quietly. Guard Parker carried 2 of them to safety under heavy fire before returning. "For the 3rd. Alex's hands trembled as he held the photograph. The face he'd mocked just hours ago now looked back at him with eyes that had seen things he couldn't imagine. His throat felt tight, and the urge to create content, to turn everything into entertainment, suddenly seemed childish and small. "But, sir," Alex started, his voice barely a whisper, "I didn't know, I just thought—" He trailed off, realizing how hollow his excuses sounded. You didn't think, Bennett corrected him. You saw a uniform and a hat, and you thought it was all for show. That's the problem with your generation, isn't it? Everything has to be content. Everything has to be entertaining. Outside the office, Emma pressed her ear against the door, trying to hear what was happening. She'd watched her brothers rise to social media fame with growing concern, seeing how each successful prank pushed him to attempt something more outrageous. Marcus sat with his head in his hands, wondering how many times they'd crossed lines without thinking about the consequences. Bennett walked to a cabinet and pulled out a leather-bound book. "This is our register," he explained, opening it carefully. "Every guard who has ever served here has their name in this book. Some of these names date back hundreds of years. Families who have served for generations, protecting not just a building, but the values and traditions that make us who we are." Alex's eyes scanned the pages, seeing name after name, date after date. Each entry represented a person who had dedicated their life to something greater than themselves. His own pursuit of likes and views suddenly seemed meaningless in comparison.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Sir," Alex began again, his voice stronger now, "I want to apologize, not just for today, but for not understanding, for not respecting what all this means." Bennett studied him for a long moment. "An apology is a start," he said finally. "But actions have consequences, Mr. Thompson. Your little stunt was recorded by dozens of phones. By now it's probably all over social media, though not in the way you intended." As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find hundreds of notifications pouring in. The video of his attempt to grab the guard's hat, followed by Parker's swift response and Bennett's intervention, had indeed gone viral. But the comments weren't celebrating his prank. They were condemning it. Disgusting behavior. Finally, someone stands up to these disrespectful influencers. Hope they throw the book at him. Unsubscribed. Can't support this kind of disrespect. Alex's carefully built online persona was crumbling before his eyes. The very audience he'd tried to entertain was turning against him, and for the first time, he realized they were right to do so. Bennett watched as Alex scrolled through the comments, letting each one sink in. "Your generation has power," he said thoughtfully. "Those phones, those platforms, they could be used to educate, to inspire, to preserve traditions. Instead, too often they're used to mock and disrespect the things that deserve our reverence." A knock at the door interrupted them. Another guard entered, whispering something to Bennett. The officer nodded and turned back to Alex. "Guard Parker would like to speak with you," he said. "Are you prepared to listen this time?" Alex nodded quickly, his heart racing. The guard who had stopped his prank, whose history he now knew, wanted to talk to him. The door opened again, and Ryan Parker entered the office. He was still in his full ceremonial uniform, but something about him seemed different to Alex now. The uniform wasn't a costume. It was armor, earned through sacrifice and service. Parker stood at parade rest, his posture perfect even in this informal setting. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand you're something of an influencer." Alex winced at the word. "I thought I was," he admitted. "Now I'm not so sure what I am." Parker's expression softened slightly. "Then perhaps this is an opportunity," he said. "You have a platform. You have people's attention. The question is, what will you do with it now?" The weight of the question hung in the air. Outside, Emma and Marcus were finally allowed into the office, both of them looking concerned but relieved to see Alex unharmed. Marcus still held his camera, but for once, he wasn't trying to record anything. "I want to make this right," Alex said, looking between Parker and Bennett. "I want to show people what I learned today, what all this really means." Bennett and Parker exchanged glances. That, Bennett said, would be a start. But it won't be easy. The damage to your reputation. I don't care about my reputation, Alex interrupted, surprising himself with his own conviction. I care about the truth, about showing respect where it's due. For the first time that day, a small smile crossed Parker's face. Then perhaps something good can come from this after all, he said. But first, there's something you need to see. Parker led them out of the office and through a series of corridors, each one lined with more history, more photographs, more reminders of the weight of tradition. They arrived at a small museum within the castle grounds, one that most tourists never saw. This, Parker said, gesturing to the displays, is our real history, not the tourist version. The real stories of real people who served here, who died here, who believed in something greater than themselves. As Alex walked through the museum, reading the stories, seeing the faces of those who had come before, something began to change inside him. The need to perform, to create content, to chase likes and views, it all fell away, replaced by a genuine desire to understand and learn. Emma watched her brother with tears in her eyes, seeing a transformation she had hoped for but never expected. Marcus filmed quietly, not for content, but to document a moment of real change. This wasn't going to be another viral video. This was going to be something much more important. The sun was setting by the time they finished their tour, casting long shadows through the castle windows. Alex stood at attention as Parker and Bennett prepared to dismiss them, his posture unconsciously mimicking their military bearing. "What happens now?" Alex asked, his voice steady despite his uncertainty. "That," Bennett replied, "is entirely up to you. You have a choice to make, Mr. Thompson. Will you go back to creating content that tears things down, or will you use your influence to build something worthwhile?" Alex looked at his sister, at his friend, at the guards who had taught him more in one day than he'd learned in years of chasing fame. His answer, when it came, was simple but sincere. "I want to build something worthwhile," he said. "And I want to start by telling your story, the real story, not for views or likes, but because people need to understand." As they left Windsor Castle that evening, Alex Thompson was not the same person who had arrived that morning. The prankster who had sought to mock tradition had been replaced by someone who understood its value. Someone who had learned that true influence comes not from tearing things down, but from understanding and respecting what others have built. The transformation was just beginning, but its foundation was solid. Built not on the shifting sands of social media fame, but on the bedrock of respect, understanding, and genuine growth. The hotel room felt different that night. Alex sat at the desk, staring at his open laptop, the cursor blinking on an empty video editing screen. His usual fast-paced editing style, filled with quick cuts and flashy effects, suddenly felt wrong for what he needed to say. Behind him, Marcus sat quietly on the bed, the day's footage safely stored on multiple memory cards. Emma had gone to her own room next door, but not before hugging her brother tightly, whispering, "I knew you had it in you to be better." Those words echoed in his mind as he tried to find the right way to address his followers. The viral video of his attempted prank had already reached millions of views. Comments flooded in by the thousands, most of them condemning his actions. His follower count was dropping rapidly, but for the first time in his social media career, numbers didn't matter. Something more important was at stake. After 3 hours of writing and rewriting, Alex finally looked at Marcus. "Ready?" he asked. His friend nodded, setting up the camera one last time that day. No fancy lighting, no carefully curated background, just Alex, looking directly into the lens with honest eyes. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Today, I made a terrible mistake at Windsor Castle. Many of you have seen the video of me trying to knock off a royal guard's hat. What you haven't seen is what happened afterward, and that's what I need to share with you tonight." As Alex spoke, he felt the weight of Officer Bennett's words, saw again the photographs of fallen soldiers, remembered the look in Guard Parker's eyes. He told his audience everything, the history he'd learned, the sacrifices he'd never understood, the true meaning of the uniform he'd tried to mock. "I met real heroes today," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "Not social media influencers like me, not celebrities, but men and women who put their lives on the line for something greater than themselves. Guard Ryan Parker, the man whose hat I tried to knock off. He saved 3 of his fellow soldiers in Afghanistan, 3 people who had families, dreams, futures." The words poured out now, unscripted and raw. Alex shared the story of the military museum, the register of names spanning generations, the photographs on Bennett's office walls. With each detail, he painted a picture not of tourist attractions in fancy uniforms, but of dedicated soldiers carrying on centuries of tradition and service. When he finished recording, almost an hour had passed. Marcus lowered the camera, his own eyes misty. "That's it, mate," he said softly. "That's the real you." Alex spent the next few hours editing, but not in his usual style. No background music, no quick cuts, no effects, just the truth, presented as honestly as he could tell it. As the video uploaded, he added a simple title, "An Apology and a Promise." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments began pouring in, but they were different this time. "Never seen an influencer take responsibility like this. Thank you for showing us the real meaning behind the uniform. My brother serves in the military. This made me cry. This is what real growth looks like." By morning, the video had gone viral for entirely different reasons than his usual content. News outlets picked up the story, not of the prank now, but of the transformation. Local morning shows wanted interviews, but Alex declined them all. This wasn't about getting more attention, it was about making things right. Emma knocked on his door early the next morning, holding her phone. "Have you seen this?" she asked, showing him a message that had just arrived. It was from Officer Bennett. "Mr. Thompson, your video showed courage of a different kind. Guard Parker and I would like to invite you back to Windsor Castle. There's more to the story that needs to be told, if you're willing to learn." Alex read the message 3 times before looking at his sister. "What do you think they want to show me?" Emma smiled. "Only one way to find out." The return to Windsor Castle felt different. This time, Alex walked through the gates with reverence, noticing details he'd missed before, the way other guards carried themselves, the respect in visitors' eyes, the subtle nods exchanged between guards during shift changes. Officer Bennett met them at the entrance, his presence as commanding as ever. "Follow me," he said simply. Instead of heading to his office, he led them to a different part of the castle, one not open to regular tours. As they walked, Bennett explained, "Every guard here has a story," he said. "Not just about their service, but about why they chose this path. We protect more than just a building or a tradition. We protect the ideals that these walls represent: duty, honor, sacrifice." They entered a small room filled with uniforms from different eras, each one carefully preserved. Guard Parker was waiting for them, this time in his regular military uniform rather than his ceremonial gear. He stood before a display case containing a very old bearskin hat, its fur worn but still proud. "This belonged to my grandfather, Parker," said, his voice soft with respect. "He wore it during his service here, just like his father before him. When I put on my uniform each morning, I carry their legacy with me." Alex listened as Parker shared stories of his family's military history, of the bonds formed between guards, of the weight of responsibility they carried. Marcus filmed quietly, understanding now that they weren't creating content, they were preserving history. The day unfolded with more revelations. They met other guards, each with their own stories. A young guard whose grandmother had been saved by British soldiers during World War II, inspiring her grandson to serve. A veteran guard who had helped evacuate civilians during a terrorist threat, his ceremonial uniform hiding battle scars earned in service. As they toured areas usually off limits to the public, Alex began to see Windsor Castle not just as a tourist attraction, but as a living, breathing institution. The guards weren't statues or photo opportunities. They were the heartbeat of centuries, of tradition, keeping time with their measured steps and unwavering dedication. During a quiet moment, Officer Bennett shared something unexpected. "You know," he said, "your video has already made a difference. This morning, I had 3 young people approach the gates. Instead of trying to make the guards laugh or break character, they asked about the history of the uniform. They wanted to know the meaning behind what we do." Alex felt a warmth in his chest that no amount of likes or views had ever given him. "That's what I want to do now," he said. "Use my platform to share real stories, to show people what really matters." Bennett nodded approvingly. "Then let's give you more stories to tell." The rest of the day was spent learning the intricate details of guard duty, the hours of preparation, the rigorous training, the absolute dedication required. Alex learned about the weight of the bearskin hat, the proper way to stand at attention, the significance of every movement and gesture. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the castle grounds, Parker pulled Alex aside. "You know," he said, "what you did yesterday, trying to knock off my hat, it wasn't the first time someone's tried that, but you're the first one who came back to learn why they shouldn't have." Alex looked at the guard, seeing not the stern figure from yesterday, but a man dedicated to something greater than himself. "Thank you," he said simply, "for stopping me, for teaching me." Parker's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that hurt our pride a bit," he replied. "The question is, what will you do with what you've learned?" Before leaving that evening, Alex stood once more before the castle gates, the same spot where just a day ago he'd tried to create viral content at the expense of others' dignity. Now, he stood there with understanding, with respect, with a new purpose. Marcus raised his camera one last time, capturing Alex as he faced the setting sun. This time, when Alex spoke, his words weren't rehearsed or designed for likes. They came from a place of genuine transformation. Dawn broke over London as Alex sat in his hotel room, scrolling through the thousands of responses to his apology. A video. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the previous evening, but these notifications were different from the usual social media noise. People weren't just watching, they were listening, learning, and sharing their own stories of transformation. Marcus knocked on his door early, camera already in hand. But his usual excitement about filming was replaced with something more thoughtful. "Got something to show you," he said, setting up his laptop. The local news had picked up their story, but not in the way either of them expected. The headline read, "Social media stars failed prank leads to powerful lesson in respect." Emma joined them, bringing coffee and a stack of printed emails. Various military organizations had reached out, asking Alex to share his experience with young people. Veterans groups wanted him to help bridge the gap between social media culture and military traditions. Even a few schools had contacted him about speaking to students about respect and personal growth. But it was one particular message that caught Alex's attention. A retired guard had written to share his story. "Dear Mr. Thompson, I served at Windsor Castle for 25 years. In all that time, I saw countless tourists try what you did, attempting to provoke a reaction for their own amusement, but none of them ever came back to learn, to understand, to make things right. Your journey has given an old soldier hope that perhaps the younger generation can bridge the gap between tradition and progress. Would you be willing to meet? There are stories that need to be told, histories that should be preserved, not as dry facts in a museum, but as living lessons for future generations. Yours sincerely, William Harrison, former senior guard, Windsor Castle Regiment. Alex looked up from the email, meeting his sister's eyes. She nodded, understanding without words. This was the next step in their journey. The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at a small cafe near Windsor Castle. William Harrison proved to be a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, his military, bearing evident even in civilian clothes. He stood when Alex approached, offering a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "I watched your video," Harrison began once they were seated. Both of them, the prank and the apology. The difference between the two young men I saw was remarkable. Alex shifted uncomfortably, but Harrison waved away his discomfort. "We all start somewhere, son. It's where we end up that matters." Over the next few hours, Harrison shared stories that hadn't made it into any official histories. He told them about the night in 1992 when Windsor Castle caught fire and how the guards had worked alongside firefighters to save priceless artifacts. He spoke of standing watch during state visits, royal weddings, and moments of national crisis. Marcus filmed quietly, understanding that they were capturing something precious, not content for clicks, but history preserved through personal testimony. The guard duty, Harrison explained, is not about standing still or wearing ceremonial uniforms. It's about being part of something larger than yourself. Every step we take on patrol, every hour we stand at attention, we're not just guarding a building. We're guarding the continuity of history itself. As Harrison spoke, Alex noticed other patrons in the cafe listening intently. A young boy at a nearby table had stopped eating his cake, completely entranced by the stories. His mother smiled apologetically, but Harrison invited them to join the conversation. The boy, probably no more than 10, had dozens of questions. Harrison answered each one with patience and respect, treating the child's curiosity with the same seriousness he would have given a military briefing. "Do the hats ever fall off when it's windy?" the boy asked. Harrison smiled. "Those bearskin hats weigh about 1.5 pounds, he explained. They're specially fitted to each guard and secured properly. But more importantly, wearing them is an honor we earn. No guard would ever let their hat fall. It represents too much history, too much pride." Alex watched the interaction, remembering his own childish attempt to disrupt that dignity. The contrast between his previous attitude and the pure curiosity of this child struck him deeply. As the afternoon wore on, more people gathered around their table. Harrison's stories drew them in, but it was the obvious respect between him and Alex, the former guard and the reformed prankster, that kept them listening. A teenager in the crowd raised her hand hesitantly. "I followed you before," she told Alex. "I used to think your pranks were hilarious. But this is better. It's real." Alex thanked her, understanding that his transformation wasn't just personal anymore. It was reaching others, showing them a different way to engage with the world. Harrison shared more stories as the sun began to set. He told them about the guard who saved a child from drowning in the Thames while off duty, still wearing his ceremonial uniform. He spoke of the silent vigils kept during national mourning, of the weight of standing guard during moments of historical significance. Before they parted, Harrison reached into his bag and pulled out an old photograph. It showed him as a young guard, standing at attention outside Windsor Castle. But it was the background that caught Alex's attention. In it, another young man was attempting to distract the guard, trying to create a moment of entertainment at the expense of dignity. "I kept this photo," Harrison said, "because it reminded me of something important. Every person who tries to mock what we do is someone who hasn't yet learned what it means. Some never learn, but some, like you, do." As they prepared to leave, Harrison had one more surprise. He handed Alex a small box. Inside was a replica of a guard's button, polished to a perfect shine. "We give these to new recruits on their first day of training," he explained, "to remind them that they're becoming part of something greater than themselves. I think you've earned this in your own way." Alex held the button carefully, feeling its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. "Thank you," he said, understanding that this small token represented not just his personal growth, but his responsibility to share what he'd learned. On the walk back to their hotel, Emma linked her arm through her brother's. "You know," she said, "when we came to London, I was worried about what kind of trouble you'd get into. I never expected this." Alex smiled, touching the box in his pocket. "Neither did I. But I think this trouble was exactly what I needed to find my way." That evening, as Alex prepared to record another video, he looked at himself in the mirror. The person staring back wasn't the prankster who had arrived at Windsor Castle days ago. He was someone new, someone who understood the value of tradition, the importance of respect, and the power of genuine transformation. Marcus set up the camera, but before they started filming, he had a question. "What are you going to tell them?" Alex placed Harrison's button carefully on the desk where it would be visible in the shot. "The truth," he replied, "that sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our most important lessons. That respect isn't old-fashioned, it's timeless. And that every tradition we mock probably carries a deeper meaning than we understand." The morning light streamed through the hotel window as Alex reviewed the latest comments on his video series. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but these weren't the usual empty likes and shares. People were sharing their own stories of transformation, of moments when they realized the importance of respect and tradition. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Emma entered, followed by Marcus, both carrying coffee and wearing expressions that suggested they had news. "Your videos have caught some serious attention," Emma said, handing him her tablet. On the screen was an email from the British Armed Forces Veterans Association. "Dear Mr. Thompson, your recent videos documenting your experience at Windsor Castle and subsequent journey have resonated deeply within our community. We would like to invite you to participate in an upcoming event honoring retired guards and active service members. Your perspective on bridging the gap between modern social media culture and military traditions could provide valuable insights. Would you be willing to share your story at our annual gathering next week? Respectfully, Colonel Richard Blackwood, Director of Veteran Affairs." Alex looked up from the tablet, his heart racing. This wasn't just another social media opportunity. This was a chance to speak to the very community he had once disrespected. But before he could respond, Marcus played a video on his laptop. It was a compilation of reaction videos from other social media influencers. Some were apologizing for their own past disrespectful behaviors at military sites. Others were sharing stories of family members who served. The hashtag #OneRespectTheUniform was trending, but not with mockery, with genuine understanding. As they discussed the invitation, another message arrived, this one from Officer Bennett at Windsor Castle. He requested their presence that afternoon, something about a special ceremony they might want to document. When they arrived at Windsor Castle, the atmosphere was different. The usual tourists were there, but Alex noticed a change in their behavior. People were standing further back from the guards, speaking in respectful tones, actually reading the historical plaques instead of just taking selfies. Officer Bennett met them at a side entrance. His usual stern expression softened slightly. "Follow me," he said. "Today you're going to see something few civilians ever witness." They were led through corridors to a private courtyard where several guards stood in formation. Among them was Guard Parker. But today was different. Today was his promotion ceremony. "Before you film anything," Bennett explained, You need to understand what you're about to witness. This ceremony dates back hundreds of years. Every movement, every word has meaning. For the next hour, they watched as Parker received his new rank. The precision of the ceremony was breathtaking. Each step, each salute, each word spoken carried the weight of centuries of tradition. Marcus filmed with reverence, understanding that they were capturing something sacred. After the ceremony, Parker approached them in his fresh insignia. "This is what you nearly interrupted that day," he said, not unkindly. "Every guard here has earned their position through years of service, dedication, and respect for tradition." Alex nodded, remembering his foolish attempt to mock what he hadn't understood, but Parker wasn't finished. "Your videos have done something unexpected," he continued. "They've helped people understand why we stand here, why we maintain these traditions." Throughout the afternoon, they were allowed to document other aspects of guard life rarely seen by the public. They witnessed the changing of the guard from behind the scenes, the inspection of uniforms, the precision of movement, the passing of orders. A young guard named Thomas shared his story. "My grandfather guarded this castle during World War II," he said. "When the bombs were falling on London, he stood his post. Not because he had to, but because it meant something. It still means something." As they filmed, more guards began sharing their stories. One spoke of standing watch during royal weddings, another of maintaining his post during severe storms. Each story added layers to Alex's understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform. Later that day, they were introduced to Sarah Mitchell, one of the few female guards in Windsor Castle's history. Her presence challenged Alex's preconceptions further. Standing at attention in her uniform, she was every bit as commanding as her male counterparts. "People often think this is just about following rules and standing still," she said. "But every second we stand here, we're carrying forward a legacy. We're showing that some things are worth preserving, worth respecting." The sun was setting when Officer Bennett gathered them for one final revelation. He led them to a small private museum within the castle, one not open to the public. Inside were artifacts from centuries of guard service, worn uniforms, old photographs, letters from guards who had served during times of war and peace. "This is our true heritage," Bennett explained, gesturing to a wall of photographs. "Every face you see here understood something vital. That tradition isn't about being old-fashioned. It's about maintaining standards that never go out of style. Honor, duty, respect." Alex studied the photographs, seeing the same pride, the same dedication in faces from different eras. He realized that what he had once dismissed as outdated ceremony was actually an unbroken line of service stretching back through generations. As they prepared to leave, Bennett handed Alex an old journal. "It belonged to a guard who served here in 1940, he said. "Read it. Understand that what we do has always been about more than standing still in fancy uniforms." That night, back in his hotel room, Alex opened the journal. The pages were filled with daily observations, thoughts, and experiences of a young guard serving during World War II. One entry particularly caught his attention. "Today, a child asked me why I stand so still. I told her that sometimes standing still is the strongest thing a person can do. Standing still means standing firm. Standing still means standing for something." Alex looked at his own reflection in the window, remembering how he had once thought. The guards were nothing more than tourist attractions. Now he understood that standing still was an act of dedication, a physical representation of unwavering commitment. Marcus was editing their footage from the day when Emma brought up the Veterans Association invitation. "You have to do it," she said. "You have to share what you've learned." Alex nodded, already composing his response in his mind. But first, he had another video to make. One that would show his followers the true meaning of standing guard, of maintaining traditions in a world that too often dismissed them as irrelevant. The old journal lay open on Alex's desk, its pages yellowed with age, but its words as powerful as the day they were written. The lamp cast a warm glow over the careful handwriting of Private George Wells, the Windsor Castle guard who had documented his experiences during World War II. Alex had spent the entire night reading, unable to put the journal down. Marcus sat nearby, camera ready but silent, understanding that something profound was happening. Emma had fallen asleep on the hotel room's small sofa, research papers about Windsor Castle's history scattered around her. September 15th, 1940, Alex read aloud, his voice soft with reverence. The bombs fell on London again tonight. We could see the glow of fires from our posts. A young evacuee asked me why we keep standing guard when the enemy is in the sky. I told her we stand because some things must not fall. Some traditions must survive even the darkest nights. The words hit differently now. Alex remembered his own mocking attitude just days ago, how he had seen the guards as nothing more than entertainment opportunities. Now, reading these accounts of steadfast duty during one of Britain's darkest hours, he understood something deeper about what it meant to stand guard. A knock at the door startled them. Officer Bennett entered, accompanied by Guard Parker and an elderly gentleman who moved with military precision despite his advanced age. Alex recognized him immediately from the photographs in the Castle Museum. Former Guard Captain Michael Wells, George Wells's son. "The journal you're reading," Captain Wells said, settling into a chair, "belonged to my father. Officer Bennett told me how you've been sharing our stories. I thought perhaps you'd like to hear more about the man who wrote those words." For the next several hours, Captain Wells shared memories of his father and his own experiences as a guard. He spoke of generations of service, of lessons passed down from father to son, of traditions maintained through war and peace. "My father stood guard during the Blitz," Wells explained. "When air raid sirens sounded, he would ensure the safety of others before taking shelter himself. One night, he remained at his post during a raid to help guide a group of lost children to safety. He never mentioned it in his journal. To him, it was simply duty." Alex glanced at the journal entry for that date. It simply read, "Tonight was difficult. We persevere." The modesty of those words, the understated heroism, struck Alex deeply. His own social media presence had always been about drawing attention, making noise, seeking validation. Here was a man who had done something truly heroic and recorded it in just 4 words. Marcus had begun filming, capturing Captain Wells's stories with careful respect. The elderly officer spoke of his own service, of standing guard during the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, of maintaining traditions through decades of social change. "Young people today often ask why we still need guards," Wells said. His eyes, sharp with memories, they see us as remnants of a bygone era. But what we guard isn't just a building or a ceremony. We guard the connection between past and future. We stand as living reminders that some values, duty, honor, sacrifice, never go out of date. Emma had awakened and was taking notes, her journalist's instincts capturing every detail. She asked about the training, the discipline required to stand motionless for hours, the weight of tradition that each guard carried. Wells smiled at her questions, the physical challenges, the heavy uniform, the long hours, the strict discipline. "They're just the beginning," he explained. "The real test is understanding what you represent. Every guard who stands at Windsor Castle stands for every guard who came before and every guard who will come after." As the morning light began to filter through the windows, Wells reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "This was my father's training journal," he said, handling it with care. The first thing they taught him wasn't how to stand or march. It was how to understand the weight of history he would carry. Alex read the first page aloud. "To stand guard at Windsor Castle is to become part of a living chain. linking past to present to future. We do not simply stand, we continue. The words resonated with his recent experiences, his transformation from thoughtless prankster to someone beginning to understand the depth of what he had once mocked. Captain Wells shared more stories throughout the morning. He told them about the guard who maintained his post during the Great Storm of 1987, when hurricane-force winds battered the castle, about the guard who spotted a fire before it could damage priceless artifacts, about countless small moments of dedication that never made headlines but maintained the standard of excellence every guard was expected to uphold. As Wells spoke, Alex noticed something remarkable. The elderly captain's posture, his bearing, the precise way he gestured, everything about him still reflected his years of service. The discipline hadn't faded with retirement. It had become part of who he was. When you put on that uniform, Wells explained, you become part of something greater than yourself. Every step, every movement, every moment of stillness carries the weight of tradition. We don't stand still because we're required to. We stand still because we're honored to. Before leaving, Wells had one more surprise. He handed Alex a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was his father's spare uniform, button polished to a mirror shine. This was in his effects when he passed, Wells said quietly. He would have wanted someone who understands its value to have it. Alex held the button carefully, feeling its weight, not just physical, but historical. The metal was worn smooth by years of service, years of standing guard through war and peace, through historic moments and quiet nights. That afternoon, Alex recorded his next video. This time, he didn't sit at his usual desk or use his usual upbeat style. Instead, he stood, adopting the posture he had learned from the guards. On the table before him lay George Wells's journal and the well-worn button. What I'm learning, he told his viewers, isn't just about military tradition or historical ceremony. It's about understanding that some things are worth preserving, some principles are worth standing still for. When those guards stand at attention, they're not just following orders. They're maintaining a connection to every guard who came before them and every guard who will follow. The Veterans Association Hall stood imposing against the morning sky, its brick facade speaking of decades of history. Alex stood outside, adjusting his tie, the first time he'd worn one since his school days. The weight of George Wells's uniform, a button in his pocket, reminded him of why he was here. Emma and Marcus flanked him, providing silent support. The camera that had once captured pranks now held something far more significant, stories of honor, duty, and transformation. Through its lens, they had documented not just Alex's journey from disrespectful tourist to humble student, but the deeper story of Windsor Castle's guardians. Colonel Richard Blackwood greeted them at the entrance, his military bearing evident. In every movement, the hall inside was filling with veterans, active service members, and their families. Each face carried stories of service, sacrifice, and dedication. You understand, Colonel Blackwood said quietly, that this audience is different from your usual followers. These people have lived the traditions you recently discovered. Some may be skeptical of your presence here. Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. 5 days ago, I would have dismissed their skepticism, he admitted. Now I understand why it's earned, why it matters. The colonel led them to a small preparation room. Inside, to Alex's surprise, stood Officer Bennett and Guard Parker, both in full-dress uniform. Several other Windsor Castle guards, past and present, were also present. We thought you might want to hear a few more stories before you speak, Bennett explained. Stories that might help you understand why your journey matters to more than just yourself. An elderly guard stepped forward, introducing himself as retired Sergeant Major James Harrison. In 1982, he began, a tourist tried to make me laugh during my guard duty. Nothing unusual, It happened daily. But this tourist was different. He came back the next day to apologize, said his grandfather had been a soldier, and he'd realized he was dishonoring his memory. Harrison paused, letting his words sink in. That tourist later joined the military himself. Today, his son stands guard at Windsor Castle. Sometimes, it takes one moment of realization to change a life's direction. More guards shared their stories. Tales of standing watch during historical moments, of maintaining composure during personal tragedy, of upholding traditions that stretched back centuries. Each story added another layer to Alex's understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform. One young guard, barely older than Alex, spoke of his first day of duty. "I was nervous," he admitted, "afraid I'd move at the wrong time, break protocol. Then my commanding officer told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'You're not standing here alone. You're standing with every guard who came before you and every guard who will follow.'" As the morning wore on, Alex revised his speech. The carefully prepared words seemed inadequate now, too polished, too removed from the raw truth he'd learned. Instead, he began writing from the heart, letting the stories he'd heard guide his message. Marcus filmed quietly, capturing these moments of preparation. Emma watched her brother with pride, seeing how far he'd come from the thoughtless prankster of just days ago. When it was time to enter the main hall, Alex felt a different kind of nervousness than he'd ever experienced, making content. This wasn't about likes or shares or going viral. This was about honoring truth, respecting tradition, and acknowledging his own growth. Colonel Blackwood introduced him to the assembled crowd. His introduction was brief, mentioning both Alex's initial disrespectful act and his subsequent journey of understanding. The audience's silence held both skepticism and curiosity. Alex stepped to the podium, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. He took a deep breath, touched the button in his pocket, and began speaking. "A week ago, I thought I knew what strength looked like," he said. "I thought it was about getting attention, breaking rules, pushing boundaries. I tried to knock off a Royal Guards hat for social media entertainment. In doing so, I displayed the worst kind of ignorance, the kind that mocks what it doesn't understand." He shared what he'd learned from reading George Wells's journal, from meeting Captain Wells, from listening to the stories of guards past and present. He spoke of standing still as an act of strength, of tradition as a bridge between generations, of respect as a foundation for growth. "What I've learned," he continued, "isn't just about military protocol or ceremonial duties. It's about understanding that some things deserve to remain unshaken. The guards at Windsor Castle don't stand still because they're inflexible. They stand still because they're strong enough to carry the weight of history on their shoulders." As he spoke, Alex saw heads nodding, expressions softening. Veterans who had entered the hall with crossed arms now leaned forward, listening intently. Active service members exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the truth in his words. He shared the story of the guard who stood his post during the Blitz, of the generations of fathers and sons who had worn the uniform, of the quiet heroism that never made headlines but maintained the standards that kept traditions alive. "When I tried to knock off that hat," he admitted, "I wasn't just disrespecting one guard. I was disrespecting every person who ever stood watch, every sacrifice made, every moment of dedication that built this legacy of service." The hall was silent now, hanging on his words. Alex could see tears in some eyes, recognition in others. Even Colonel Blackwood's stern expression had softened. "Today, I stand before you not as an influencer or content creator, but as someone who learned the hard way that true influence comes from understanding, not mockery, from respect, not rebellion." He concluded by taking the button from his pocket, holding it up for all to see. "This belonged to a guard who stood watch during our country's darkest hours," he said. "It reminds me that some traditions are worth preserving, some standards worth maintaining, some principles worth standing still for. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous or overwhelming. It was respectful, measured, meaningful, exactly like the traditions Alex had come to understand. The reception hall buzzed with conversation as veterans and service members approached Alex one by one. Each carried a story, a memory, a piece of history they now felt compelled to share. Marcus captured it all, his camera moving discreetly through the crowd, documenting this unexpected bridge between generations. A tall, distinguished veteran in his 80s made his way forward, leaning slightly on a polished cane. His medal-adorned chest spoke of years of service, but it was his eyes that caught Alex's attention. They held both wisdom and unexpected warmth. Commander Edward Pierce, he introduced himself, extending a firm handshake. I served as a Windsor Guard from 1962 to 1985. Your speech reminded me of something we've been trying to explain to the public for years. Alex listened intently as Commander Pierce led him to a quiet corner of the hall. The veteran pulled out an old, worn photograph from his wallet. It showed a much younger version of himself standing guard during what appeared to be a royal ceremony. This was taken during the Queen's Silver Jubilee, Pierce explained. That day, a young man much like yourself tried to distract me. Made all sorts of jokes, tried to make me laugh. But what he didn't know was that my father was dying in hospital that very morning. Alex's breath caught. The commander continued, his voice steady but touched with emotion. Standing still that day was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But it wasn't just about following protocol. It was about showing that some things, duty, honor, commitment, remain unshaken even in our darkest moments. Emma, who had been taking notes nearby, asked why he'd never shared this story publicly. Pierce smiled sadly. Some lessons, he said, can't be taught. They have to be learned through experience, through understanding, through moments like yours at the castle gates. Throughout the afternoon, more veterans approached, each sharing their own connections to the Guard tradition. A woman in her 40s, wearing her service medals proudly, spoke of her grandfather, who'd served as a guard during World War II. He used to say that standing guard wasn't about the uniform or the ceremony, she explained. It was about being a living link in a chain that stretched back through history. Every time we stand still, we're holding that chain together. Officer Bennett, who had remained quietly observant until now, stepped forward with news that made Alex's heart race. Your video series has caught the attention of military training facilities across the country, he said. They want to use it as part of their instruction on the importance of maintaining traditions in modern times. The impact of his transformation was spreading beyond anything Alex had imagined. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but they were different now. Instead of followers asking for pranks and jokes, people were sharing their own stories of military family members, of learning respect, of understanding traditions they'd once dismissed. A young Guard cadet, barely 20 years old, approached Alex with tears in his eyes. I almost quit training last week, he admitted. Couldn't understand the point of all the ceremony, all the strict protocols. But watching your journey, it helped me see what I'm really part of. Marcus captured these moments with careful respect, understanding that they were documenting something far more significant than social media content. This was living history, the passing of understanding from one generation to the next. As the afternoon wore on, Colonel Blackwood gathered everyone for an unexpected announcement. The Royal Guard Command had made a decision. They wanted to create a formal educational program about the Guard tradition, and they wanted Alex to help develop it. This isn't just about preventing disrespect, Blackwood explained. It's about building bridges between tradition and modern, understanding. Your journey from ignorance to appreciation represents exactly what we need to convey. Alex stood stunned as the colonel outlined the proposal. They wanted him to work with current and former guards to create content that would help people understand the meaning behind the ceremonies, the importance of the traditions, the human stories behind the stoic facades. A retired guard sergeant spoke up from the crowd. "For years, we've tried to explain why we do what we do," he said. "But sometimes it takes someone who once stood on the other side to build that bridge of understanding." Emma watched her brother with pride as he accepted the proposal. The transformation she'd witnessed went far beyond a simple lesson learned. Alex had become a connector between worlds, the modern world of social media and instant content, and the timeless world of tradition and service. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Commander Pierce approached Alex one last time. He pressed something into Alex's hand, a guard's ceremonial coin worn smooth by years of service. "My father gave this to me when I first joined the guards," he said quietly. "It reminded me that I was becoming part of something greater than myself. I think you understand that now too." Alex held the coin carefully, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. Each scratch, each wear mark told a story of service, of standing still when others would have moved, of maintaining standards when others would have faltered. That night, back in his hotel room, Alex recorded his next video. The ceremonial coin lay on the desk beside him, catching the light as he spoke. But this time, he wasn't just talking to his followers. He was speaking to every person who had ever stood watch, who had ever maintained traditions in the face of mockery, who had ever chosen to stand still when others demanded movement. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of the Royal Guard Academy. Alex stood at attention, not as a guard, but as a student, learning the precise movements and protocols he had once mocked. Around him, veteran guards and active service members gathered to begin work on the educational program that would bridge the gap between tradition and modern understanding. Officer Bennett walked the line of assembled participants, his boots clicking sharply on the polished floor. "Today," he announced, "we begin something unprecedented. We're not just teaching protocol, we're teaching understanding. And who better to help us than someone who made the journey from ignorance to respect?" Marcus set up his camera equipment with newfound reverence, understanding that what they were about to document went far beyond social media content. Emma sat nearby, her journalist's notebook ready to capture every detail of this historic collaboration. The first lesson began with something Alex had never considered: the weight of the uniform. Each piece was laid out before them, and guard. Sergeant Sarah Mitchell explained the history and significance of every component. "This bearskin hat," she said, lifting the iconic headpiece, "weighs about 1.5 pounds. But its real weight isn't physical. It's the weight of every guard who wore it before you, every moment of history it witnessed, every tradition it represents." Alex was invited to try on the hat, but this time with proper instruction and respect. The moment was captured on camera, not as entertainment, but as education. The difference between his first attempt to touch the hat and this moment of guided learning spoke volumes about his transformation. Throughout the morning, guards shared stories that would become part of the educational program. A veteran named Thomas Wright spoke of standing guard during the Great Fire of Windsor Castle in 992. "We didn't move," he recalled, "even as ash fell around us, because standing still wasn't about being statues. It was about showing that some things remained constant even in chaos." The program began to take shape, combining traditional military history with personal narratives. Alex worked closely with the guards to ensure every piece of content respected the gravity of the tradition while remaining accessible to modern audiences. During a break, a young guard cadet approached Alex with tears in his eyes. "My friends used to share videos of people mocking the guards," he admitted. "Now they're sharing your videos, learning why we do what we do. You're changing minds." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. an elderly woman who introduced herself as Margaret Thompson, no relation to Alex. She had served as one of the first female guards at Windsor Castle in the 1980s. When I first put on the uniform, she said people thought it was a joke. A woman standing guard? But I stood still, I stood straight. I showed them that tradition isn't about gender, it's about dedication. Her story became another powerful component of the educational program. Alex interviewed her, capturing decades of wisdom about breaking barriers while maintaining traditions. Margaret shared photographs of her service years, each one telling a story of determination and respect. As they worked, news outlets began picking up the story. A BBC reporter arrived to document this unusual collaboration between social media, influencer and military institution. But Alex was no longer interested in personal publicity. His focus remained on the stories that needed to be told. Guard Parker, who had stopped Alex's prank attempt just days ago, now worked alongside him as a mentor. He taught Alex the precise movements of the guard change ceremony, explaining how each step, each turn, carried meaning. These movements haven't changed in centuries, Parker explained, demonstrating the rifle drill. Not because we're resistant to change, but because some things are worth preserving exactly as they are. The educational program expanded to include virtual tours of areas normally off-limits to the public. They filmed the guard quarters, the training facilities, the private ceremonies that few civilians ever witnessed. Each location came with stories from guards past and present. A section of the program focused on the families of guards, the untold story of those who supported the men and women standing watch. Children of guards shared what it was like growing up with a parent who carried such a visible symbol of tradition. My father missed my 5th birthday because he was standing guard during a state visit, one daughter recalled. I was angry until I understood what his service meant. Now I'm proud to tell people that my father helps preserve history. As the day wound down, Colonel Blackwood gathered everyone for an announcement. The program would be implemented not just in British military training, but shared with ceremonial guard units worldwide. Alex's journey from disrespect to understanding would help others make the same transformation. That evening, Alex recorded a different kind of video. Instead of his usual setup, he stood at attention in the castle courtyard, the setting sun painting the ancient stones in gold. Behind him, off-duty guards went about their evening routines, a reminder that behind every ceremonial uniform was a real person carrying real responsibility. They say the guards never move, never speak, never react, he began. But what I've learned is that their stillness speaks volumes. Their silence carries centuries of stories. Their dedication moves us more than any gesture could. The camera panned across the courtyard as Alex continued, showing the everyday moments that tourists never saw. Guards practicing their drills, maintaining their uniforms, studying the history they were tasked with preserving. Tomorrow we'll learn more than just procedures and protocols, he promised his viewers. We'll learn about the real people behind the uniforms, the families who support them, and the traditions that bind past to present to future. The world had begun to take notice. Alex sat in Windsor Castle's private conference room, surrounded by screens showing video calls from ceremonial guard units across the globe. From the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington to the EV zones in Greece, guard units worldwide had reached out to share their stories and support the educational initiative. Marcus adjusted his camera setup, preparing to document this unprecedented gathering of global guard traditions. Emma sat beside Alex, her notebook filled with details from conversations spanning continents and centuries of tradition. A guard from Arlington's Old Guard spoke first, his face serious on the large central screen. What happened at Windsor Castle, he said, happens at every ceremonial post worldwide. People forget that these traditions aren't just for show, They're living links to our history. He shared footage of tourists attempting to distract guards at the tomb of the unknown soldier, contrasting it with stories of guards who remained at their post through hurricanes and blizzards. Each story reinforced the message Alex had learned, that standing still was an act of dedication, not performance. From Athens, an F-zone guard in his distinctive uniform shared how their famous slow march and stillness represented the heart of Greek military tradition. People see our uniforms and think we're tourist attractions, he explained. They don't realize each step we take follows the exact rhythm of steps taken by guards 200 years ago. The international dialogue revealed a common thread: ceremonial. Guards worldwide face the same challenges of maintaining ancient traditions in a modern world obsessed with viral content and instant entertainment. As they work to incorporate these international perspectives into the educational program, unexpected visitors arrived at Windsor Castle. A group of social media influencers, once known for their prank videos, had come to learn and understand. Among them was Tyler Chen, whose channel had millions of subscribers. "I used to think getting guards to react was content gold," he admitted. "But watching Alex's journey made me realize we were disrespecting something precious." The influencers spent the day with various guards, learning the meaning behind every movement, every tradition. They discovered that the seemingly rigid routines contained stories of incredible human resilience and dedication. Guard Parker led them through the morning inspection routine. "Every button must shine, every crease must be perfect," he explained. "Not for show, but because attention to detail in our appearance reflects our dedication to duty." The influencers filmed everything, but differently than before. Gone were the quick cuts and mocking captions, replaced by respectful documentation and genuine curiosity. Their collective audiences numbered in the tens of millions, minds that could be opened to understanding rather than mockery. During lunch, a surprise visitor joined them. Captain James Morrison, a retired guard who had served for 4 decades, shared a story that silenced the room. In 1982, he began, "A tourist tried to make me laugh during a changing of the guard. Standard stuff, jokes, funny faces. What he didn't know was that my son had died in the Falklands War just 2 days before." The room fell silent as Morrison continued. "I stood still, not because regulations demanded it, but because my stillness honored my son's sacrifice. Every second I remained motionless was a second I stood for something greater than my own grief." Alex watched as the influencers wiped tears from their eyes, their phones lowered, forgotten in the power of the moment. This was the kind of story that needed to be told, not for views or likes, but for understanding. The afternoon brought a demonstration of international guard ceremonies. Through video links, guards from different countries performed their duties. Simultaneously, a global display of shared dedication despite diverse traditions. A Japanese Imperial Guard demonstrated their precise movements, explaining how their ceremony reflected centuries of samurai tradition. From Canada, the ceremonial guard shared how they maintained their posts through extreme weather, their dedication unmoved by physical challenges. As the day progressed, the influencers worked with Alex and the guards to create content that would reach their young audiences while respecting the gravity of military tradition. They learned to see beyond the surface, to understand that every ceremonial post worldwide shared a common purpose, preserving the connection between past and present. A young guard from India's Presidential Guard shared a particularly moving story. During a ceremony, he had maintained his post despite learning of his father's passing. "Standing still that day taught me that some duties transcend personal pain," he said. "We stand not for ourselves, but for every person who ever wore the uniform." The impact of these international connections began to spread. Hashtags like Just Guardian tradition and global guards started trending, filled not with mockery, but with stories of respect and understanding. Young people worldwide were sharing their own families' military histories, creating a digital bridge between generations. As evening approached, the guards and influencers gathered in the castle courtyard for a final ceremony. Representatives from each guard unit, connected through video, stood at attention simultaneously, a global demonstration of unity and tradition. Alex stood among them, no longer an outsider looking to create content, but a bridge between worlds. His journey, from disrespect to understanding, had sparked a movement larger than himself, touching lives across continents and cultures. That night, as the international calls concluded, Officer Bennett approached Alex with news that left him speechless. The educational program would be translated into 12 languages, reaching military academies and schools worldwide. Alex's mistake and subsequent transformation would help others understand the true meaning of ceremonial tradition. Before recording his evening update, Alex spent a moment in quiet reflection. The weight of what they had achieved, not just at Windsor Castle, but globally, felt both heavy and inspiring. When he finally spoke to his camera, his words carried the accumulated wisdom of guards from around the world. 1 month had passed since Alex's attempted prank at Windsor Castle. The morning sun painted the ancient stones in familiar gold as he stood once again at the spot where everything had changed. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dozens of former pranksters and social media influencers stood with him, each carrying their own story of transformation. The educational program had exceeded all expectations. Schools worldwide were incorporating it into their curriculum, teaching students about respect, tradition, and the true meaning of service. But today's gathering was different. It was about showing the real impact of changed hearts and minds. Marcus, who had documented every step of this journey, set up his camera with practiced care. Emma stood nearby, no longer just Alex's concerned sister, but an integral part of the program's development team. Officer Bennett and Guard Parker watched from their posts, their usual stoic expressions softened by the knowledge of what was about to unfold. Today, we honor not just the guards who stand still, but everyone who's learned to stand for something greater than themselves, Alex began, addressing the assembled crowd. Beside him stood Tyler Chen, once known for his viral prank videos, now a passionate advocate for military respect. One by one, the reformed content creators shared their stories. A YouTuber from Australia spoke of how she'd once planned an elaborate prank at the Australian War Memorial, only to cancel it after watching Alex's journey. A TikTok star from Canada admitted to deleting all his guard prank videos, replacing them with educational content about military traditions. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah Mitchell, the female guard whose story had touched millions, stepped forward. In her hands, she held a collection of letters, thousands of them sent from around the world. "These aren't just papers," she explained, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "These are promises. Promises from people who once mocked what they didn't understand, who now pledge to protect and respect our traditions." The letters were displayed on a wall inside the castle, a testament to the ripple effect of one moment of transformation. Among them was a note from a 12-year-old girl in America. "Because of your videos, I understand why my grandfather never jokes about his military service. Some things are too important for pranks." As the morning progressed, Guard Parker led a special demonstration. But unlike the usual changing of the guard, this ceremony included explanation and understanding. Former pranksters stood at attention alongside real guards, experiencing firsthand the discipline required to maintain tradition. "The world has changed," Officer Bennett observed, watching the unusual gathering. "But what they're learning isn't just about standing still. It's about standing for something. News crews from multiple countries captured the event, but their coverage wasn't focused on viral moments or sensational headlines. Instead, they documented the quiet transformation of a generation learning to value substance over spectacle. A young guard recruit, fresh from training, approached Alex during a break. "Your video was shown on my first day of training," he said. "It helped me understand that we're not just preserving tradition. We're building bridges between past and future." The afternoon brought another surprise. The Royal Guard Command had decided to create a permanent exhibition at Windsor Castle, dedicated to helping visitors understand the human stories behind the ceremonial uniforms. Alex's journey would be featured not as a cautionary tale, but as a story of transformation and understanding. Captain Wells, who had shared his father's wartime journal, returned to unveil the exhibition's centerpiece, a wall of photographs showing guards throughout history, each image accompanied by a personal story of service and sacrifice. "These aren't just pictures," the captain explained to the gathered crowd. "They're reminders that behind every uniform is a person who chose to stand for something greater than themselves. Someone who understood that some traditions are worth preserving, some standards worth maintaining." The day's events were live-streamed globally, reaching millions. But unlike the viral prank videos of the past, the comment section filled with stories of understanding and respect. People shared their own families' military histories, their moments of learning, their commitments to preserving tradition. As sunset approached, Alex gathered everyone for one final moment. The guards stood at their posts, the former pranksters stood in respectful silence, and the world watched as a new tradition was born. A moment of global recognition for ceremonial guards worldwide. "We stand still to honor those who stood before us," Alex said, his voice carrying the weight of his journey. "We stand still to show that some things are worth preserving. We stand still because in a world of constant motion, sometimes the strongest statement is simply standing firm." The guards, in perfect unison, performed their evening routine. But this time, every movement was understood, every gesture appreciated, every moment of stillness recognized for what it truly represented. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. In our final part, we'll witness the lasting impact of this transformation and see how one moment of disrespect led to a global movement of understanding. Stay tuned for more incredible stories that remind us why some traditions deserve our deepest respect. Up next, we've got two more powerful stories that will change the way you see the world. Just click to watch how other moments of transformation are reshaping our understanding of respect and tradition. These aren't just stories, they're bridges between past and present, between misunderstanding and appreciation. Don't miss them.